Could you read out Baba's last message on the alphabet board?
Sure. Mayor Baba's last message.
Not the French one.
Thank you. Mayor Baba's last message on the alphabet board, October 7th, 1954. There is no reason at all for any of you to worry. Baba was, is, and Baba will also be eternally existent. Severance of external relations does not mean the termination of internal links. It was only for establishing the internal connection that the external contacts have been maintained till now. The time has now come for being bound in the chain of internal connections. Hence, external contact is no longer necessary. It is possible to establish the internal link by obeying Baba's orders. I give you all my blessings for strengthening these internal links. I am always with you, and I am not away from you. I was, I am, and will remain eternally with you, and it is not for promoting this realization that I have severed external contact. This will enable all persons to realize truth by being bound to each other with internal links. O my lovers, I love you all. It is only because of my love for my creation that I have descended on earth. Let not your hearts be torn asunder by my declaration concerning the dropping of my body. On the contrary, accept my divine will cheerfully. You can never escape from me, even if you try to escape from me. It is not possible to get rid of me. Therefore, have courage and be brave. If you thus lose your heart, how will it be possible for you to fulfill the great task which I have trusted to you? Be brave and spread my message of love far and wide to all quarters in order to fulfill my divine will. Let the words Baba Baba come forth from every nook and corner of the world and from the mouth of every child, and let their ignorance be reduced to ashes by the burning flame of my love. Come together in order to fulfill my will by taking your stand on truth, love, and honesty, and be worthy of participating. I give you all my blessings for spreading my message of love.
Well, to respond to Adele's question or implication or suggestion that as a last message on the alphabet board, which after all had been this principal liaison between Bob and so many people for so many years, that he chose this as his last message, it has to be pretty important. So obviously, it has to be a preparation when he's not there in the flesh. In fact, he says it so clearly in the message that he came here in order to establish internal links. And now that they're established, it's no longer necessary for him to continue. So, of course, that's the first part of it. I don't know how many people heard it that way, but I guess he was trying to tell them that if they were really clear and honest, they would realize that he had finished this terribly important part. So, in other words, to establish the direct relationship of God with people who are still living here in the flesh and who certainly at the start had no particular sense of God. But also, then he goes on and he brings in, golly, it's so impressive. He says, I give you all my blessings for strengthening these internal links. Of course, that's in the paragraph when he's been talking about his establishment of internal links. And then he says, I'm always with you, never away. But then he goes on, and I think this is where we are about now. I was, I am, and will remain eternally with you. It always amazes me. I know so many people now, especially in Western Europe, of course, where I am mostly, who had never met Baba. And so many of them, somewhere or another in conversation, it's not under direct questioning, it comes up that somewhat to their own amazement, but actually to their great joy, Baba's presence establishes itself. And it's not particularly anything psychic that's involved in it. They just feel Baba is there. I always remember one of the last times I saw Mayor G. Karkaria, and he was talking to the group of Baba lovers in Marseille. Somebody piped up, amazingly enough, I think Mayor G understood pretty good French, because I don't remember anybody translating this. Somebody asked the question, but Mayor G, how does it feel for you who is so close to Baba and had so much opportunity to see him? Doesn't it make you sad? Don't you miss Baba tremendously now? And Mayor G just looked at the person astonished. Listen, he said, but I'm close, I feel closer to him than even when I knew he was sitting over there on both sides of Ahmed Nagar. And then he went on to say something that almost catapulted me off of my seat. And that was, he said, I just have to admit, I see him just in back of my right shoulder, always. He's always there. He said, well, not in complete, clear detail, but I see his form as I knew him. And after the 24 hours drubbing and thorough brainwashing that Baba put me through when he had just dropped his body, that had nothing at all to do with our relationship and his presence, his continuation with me. Because as I often repeat to you, I'm not psychic, but once in a while something happens to me and I just can't doubt it. Since that 24 hours, I just always saw this sort of nice, pleasant, hazy outline that I knew was Baba's outline behind my right shoulder. So when Mayor G said that, I said, my God, now that's Baba's way of corroborating. Because Baba said, when I give you something important, I'll also give you a corroboration of it. Sometimes immediately, and sometimes not for a while. I just have to tell you, to be honest with you, what the sequel to that was. That went on for some years, as a matter of fact. And then one day when life calmed down for a little bit, which it does on occasion, I thought, my God, I don't see him over there anymore. In fact, I can't remember seeing him around a little bit. And that naturally brings up a lot of self-doubt. And you say, God, what have I done? Am I getting negligent? As Baba said, Stevens is so wrapped up in this and that and the other thing, he never thinks of me, he's not around me, he doesn't think of Baba's love and that he's deserted me. And I felt badly. And then I mentioned to you this business about having this little boy say you've forgotten about chlorophyll and you've forgotten about hemoglobin and so on. That happens to me once in a while, and something just sort of said, well, is it possible that he's inside of you? So I thought, well, I don't know, I hadn't thought about that, and how do you judge that? But then I began to think, well, I wonder, it certainly could be possible because, my mind runs into the abstract, maybe too much to the abstract. And I thought to myself, well, there must be somewhere or another that I can find out whether that's true. So I deliberately thought about removing something from inside of me over to there where I could see it. And by golly, there was that same form. And so I realized that, this fact of the truth of unity was being a reality. It was one.
It reminds me of a surprising experience I had one time. A friend of mine asked me to go to this psychic fair, which I didn't want to go to, but I thought I would sort of go and babysit her. And
A psychic fair?
yeah, with these little people, you give them a few bucks and they say.
Pretty organized nowadays.
Yeah. So, but she was drawn, my friend was drawn to one woman. And so then she talked to her for a while, and she was pretty impressed with her, and so I thought, well, you know, I don't really want to do this, but, you know, it's going to make my friend happy. So I went up and I sat down, and the first thing this woman said to me was, who is that figure with you? And I didn't know what she was talking about. My girlfriend just talked to her. And she said, no, I mean, who's the figure in your aura in white? And I was so thrilled to think I had an aura.
I heard about them too also, never saw one.
But she just started out by saying, this person has been tremendously helpful to you. And she said, if I were you, I would stay with this person, and you don't need to show up at these psychic fairs. Yeah. Yeah. She said this figure is resplendent. That was her term. Resplendent. And has been very helpful to you, very close to you. And that was wonderful for me to hear that. I mean, I had no idea that, you know, he could hop in your aura and hang around.
Well, you know, just to be a know-it-all, after all, it's no trick to a perfect one to be a lot of places at the same time.
Yeah, her psychic was a lot better than the trans channeler I had. She went on.
As long as I'm in the line.
This was before I started hearing
This
about.
was a different fair.
Now, this was a private trans channeling exhibition thing that I made an appointment before I knew Baba said don't mess with them. But this was before I started coming to the Baba Center, and I was looking to see what I should be doing with my life. Anyway, a whole bunch of really strange circumstances happened, but just to the punchline, he said, what about that saint fellow you follow? And when he said that, I mean, the hair just stood up on my neck, and I went, oh my God, I think he means Baba. But then I got kind of offended that he just called him that saint fellow you follow. But at least he recognized he was there. I like your resplendent better.
So it sticks around as far as you know.
Yeah, yep,
That's
yep.
great. Fred, what do you got?
Relating to inner links, we having the gross physical and subtle bodies. I mean, I think it was described in ordinary or something where some holy men chanted for, I don't know, periods of months, a holy mantra. It elevated them to a higher level. Basically what I'm trying to say is that it put them in a sort of an altered state. What I was thinking of is that our thoughts of Baba are first of all, they originate from the mind. And of course, they go through the energy process, and then they may turn into an action or a physical emotion or feeling.
Fred, excuse me, just one moment. You say, of course, and there are a few of courses that I would have to scratch my head about, but go ahead.
Okay, thank you. But what I'm also driving at is the fact that after you drop your physical form and you're in the heaven or hell state, you maintain that link through your amount of, I guess, Baba thoughts or sanskaras in order to connect you with the people, I guess, who would be, you know, in that realm. Is that
Sure. And I think he's got his oar into the water also pulling on it. Yeah. Well, so shall we get back to Dell's original question? Baba had to be fishing for some pretty big fish when he gave that last message on the alphabet board. Just stands to reason. And what do you think? What do you think Baba was up to? What sort of a base or an injunction do you think he might have been laying down there? I think this is important for us really to feel into Baba's message here.
And then I forget which one it was, maybe Sama talked while Baba said you should take that board and cut and put it under your skin, it's so precious, you know, and all these kinds of things. That it seems to me that this fact of internal, it's like, in a way, the way I see it is it's kind of in a way like Baba did die, in a certain sense, in that portion of the way Baba had conducted his life had definitely changed. And then shortly
Certainly
thereafter,
went much more into seclusion
Right.
constantly after that. That's right. Yes.
Well, Bob had said about the new life that he lives, he continues to live, even if there was no one to live it. And that he had, seemed like he had completed a cycle of outflow and set down the tracks for people to run, given us things like God's streets that contain this energy, and really set it on everybody's to have the responsibility to come toward him and to use this that he had set up to find.
So why do you think he tossed this in at that point when he had completed so many things? What do you think he was egging us on to? What do you think he was supplementarily setting out for us? Do you have any ideas as to the significance of all this business about inner links?
That's where we'll find it, internally.
Yeah.
Using what he has left, he's laid out the
Then I
track.
have to go back and say why. Because if he repeats it here in this critical message of what's your intuition as to the importance, what's he getting at? What's the big thing that he apparently is trying to lay out or incite our imagination? Shall I go over to Dinah at this point?
You get an awfully simplistic thing, because that's me.
Okay.
But it
let's
just
have
sort of struck me that, well, maybe this was sort of the thin end of the wedge, and he was getting us used to the fact that he wasn't going to be physically present. You know, he's
Oh, that's
cutting
in
us
the
off
first
in-
paragraph. But Dinah, in the second paragraph, you know, he said, I've already established that, and that can go on, and you got to take a bit of care of it. But the second paragraph, you know, he's sort of aside from the picture, and he talks about a chain, and that through that chain of inner links, realize me.
Yes.
Well, that's sort of amazing, isn't it? No? Let me read that sentence again to you. I am always with you, and I am not away from you. So that's reassuring. I was, I am, and will remain eternally with you. And it is not for promoting this realization that I have severed external contact. This will enable all persons to realize truth by being bound to each other with internal links. My God, to each other. Now, Bob has transferred the scene of the action there from what we are so terribly aware of and sensitive, our relationship and our continued relation to Bob. First paragraph, he says, it's there, I've done it, I've done a good job, and now it's possible to me to sever those links, and you can continue, and all you have to do is to obey me. Well, that takes a bit of head scratching, but we go on from there, and then in the second paragraph, he transfers over, and he says, you will realize truth by being bound to each other with internal links. So this sounds like something terribly important, where the focus at that moment is not on our link to Baba, but to others in a chain. I don't know, have we done anything about that? What about you, Harry?
Could it be that, getting back to a statement you made earlier, that the whole idea of spiritual groups is getting ready to change? So maybe instead of the old model where the guru on high sort of gives us information and it's like a sun and we're all receiving vehicles for the guru, perhaps the new model then is that we all are dropped souls. We all have wisdom, we all have knowledge, we all have spirituality. So the new model is for us to link up with each other and in a sense maybe create a guru, create the light giver, and that instead of the on-high guru giving us the information, we'll get it from each other.
Harry, could I ask you just one quick question, because I think what you're saying just makes so much sense, everything that I think maybe I know or sense. But do you think the word companion fits in anywhere?
I think companion is the key word.
Okay. So some way that is keyed into links.
It's almost a continuation of Bob's new life in a way, where the companionship
Was the essential element that Eric brought out.
Right.
So that's what made the impossible possible. And just an experience that one would never forget. Yes.
I just, in just linking to what Harry just said, I was telling these guys at lunchtime that I have a sister who's a Soka Gakkai Buddhist, and she's been a Buddhist maybe 2 years less than I've been with Baba. And it's a long time because I've been Baba like 31 years or something. But anyway, only recently, in the past few months, every time I talk to her, she says to me, I want to come visit your center. She's never had expressed any interest, and I want you to come see our new center. And so I think that this kind of thing is beginning to happen, you know, the way Harry's kind of, am I understanding it correctly, that these sort of subtle things are starting to happen?
And the inner links and companionship and start coming center stage. You had your hand up.
Yeah, it was actually in the line of what Harry had said, but I just had a real example of this in just talking with some people at lunch, which I think for me directly related. We were just talking about mundane issues. Specifically, we were talking about children and raising children. And suddenly I realized this wealth of companionship that I had that I wasn't aware of really in coming here for this meeting. And I was sitting with two people who had children who were able to really help me a lot in some issues that I'm dealing with. And I think that for me on a simple level, that's a significant point of link in the sense that day-to-day living is a very significant part of I know, my life. So the issue then of social links, companionship.
Yeah. Steve?
On a much larger scale than that, Val has also talked about your links in these, mentioned that when you're linked to someone who gets God realization, then you automatically get a big bump up because so many of the samskaric links that you have, your samskaras are wiped out because that person has moved into freedom. And everybody that's linked with that person gets a big bump upward.
Well, you know, I've read several things that Val said about what happens to your samskaric links when somebody else gets bumped up or disappears. And it's a fascinating concept, and it's a very encouraging one. The only thing is that I don't know how it happens that way. And so I have to put a question mark back there. I honor Val above all for his absolutely total, magnificent, incomparable love of Baba. And that's the top priority. Every once in a while, Val will come up with something. I just have to scratch my head and say, I don't know how it happens that way. So anyway, as far as destruction of samskaras, I don't know. But certainly, the fact that Baba has put such emphasis on internal links has to be of tremendous importance. And I think several intuitions here have been that it is a very key concept for the new humanity and the new age. I would just have to, just one tiny quick one, Mahu, and when you come over. Do you mind if I just get terribly personal and say that I think that perhaps the heart of the matter is what do we actually end up doing about it effectively? I know, for instance, any number of people who get more and more excited about internal links. But to be perfectly honest, because I think somebody said I'm an observer, and that is true. I think I observe. That's something I do by nature and automatically. And I observe periodic enthusiasm about an idea, but then I don't observe follow-up on it. And I think this is important. I think we've got to start being more honest with ourselves where we're getting with a fundamental injunction direct from Baba. It seems to me I see still too much of just the old familiar habit pattern of having differences, getting antagonistic, carping, splitting up. 2-3 people have this viewpoint, they get along great, and 2-3 people have that viewpoint, they get along great, and when they get together, all hell flies loose. The reason I bring it up, the reason I bring it up is because I've been around a heritage of that in England, and it's public knowledge that Baba frequently had to take the English group to task. So bump their heads together to get them even to the point of cooperating. And I don't know, maybe that's the original trial project of Baba, to try to get some people in humanity really to come to grips with this business that he certainly had to have in mind from the beginning of his advent as the avatar this time, that we're going into a new age with a new humanity, with new techniques and new things that have got to be followed. And if he gives this out, you know, he certainly had his original trial experiments along this line and nudging them along. And I just have to be frank with you. I am appalled by the lack of putting into practice the principle of internal links. I'm sorry to bring up such an observation, but you know, we're sharing a lot of things, and honesty is one of them. And on that one, on such an important point, I just have to say, well, God, there I think that we're at the bottom of the class. We get a net F mark so far from what I've been able to observe. It's so rare to see any real internal links kept and any real sacrifice of one's own personal ego to try to put it in place and then keep it in place. I think we've got to do a better job. Adele, what did you want to say?
It just seems that on the actual basis of dynamics of those statements, because when Baba said it, he had, as you said so beautifully, his divine charge in it. So he gave it a certain reality that it never had before. And the process is an evidence, certainly in the gross sense, that there is such a multiplicity of ethnic groups. I mean, I live in an area which is composed of very few people, it's just a multicolored neighborhood.
Different cultural background.
Multi-ethnic neighborhood. And we're surrounded with that in California, in Southern California.
This is going on all
And
over the world.
I think too,
Everywhere in the
just
world.
the necessity of just living, of course, as harmoniously as possible, does activate that, which Baba has said time and again, you and I are not we, but one. And so that sort of is in the background, reverberating all the time. And somehow, I myself, in my profession, as a teacher and as a nurse, have intermingled with people I personally would never have chosen to intermingle with. But by the very fact of living it, experiencing it, I have overcome so much that separated me from people. As Bob said, there's just no substitute for experience. And that experience he's imposed on us. I mean, he has brought about a pasteurization process. I mean, we all intermingling now.
And the pasteurization is supposed to kill off the bugs. The bugs have really gotten pretty widely circulated now. Go ahead, Adele.
I mean, that's all.
That's all.
That's my experience.
Sure.
That you and I are not we, but one,
Yeah.
is really happening.
Yeah. But of course, the reality of something, as we discussed about the generation of consciousness, comes along when there is contrast and even opposition. So certainly what is happening around the globe with all of these forest fire wars and revolutions and civil wars that break out everywhere, people are fugitives. They fugitive here and they go there, and first thing you know, there are 100,000 more here, and all the people who originally live in that area say, my God, what are we going to do with them? They're so different from what we are. So the big challenge is there. The big challenge to really make one aware of the problem of inner links. So if inner links are going to be established, they're going to be established in a very strong, fertile environment right now. Is this why we are being challenged to bring into being, in a situation of tremendous contrast, the inner links in the toughest sort of position? Wendy?
Don, can you give us examples or help us to discover examples of how we can strengthen internal links?
Well, yeah, I think I've told this. This is my prime time story on the subject. You remember my speaking about a guy who rented an apartment that my friend Claude Longuet had to supervise Al Burr. Everybody's heard that story.
Please. We don't remember details.
Wendy asked me the question. She's shaking her head, so she hasn't heard it. So she has high priorities. So anyway, Wendy, I get accustomed gradually in my life when something that I immediately sense is ticklish and tough comes along. I know instinctively that this is a sort of a situation which is being brought into my general environment so that something that Baba knows that I've got to deal with and unsnarl in myself can come up loud and clear. So anyway, my old friend Claude Longuet, who owns some apartments and manages some others, every once in a while would go off on a trip hither or yon, and I'd be stuck with whatever problem children he had in the real estate business for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And on this particular occasion, the big tough nut was that one of his best apartments, which was owned by a lovely Indian family living in England, the 2 little children, they had made a modest investment for a future nest egg in buying an apartment out in the same area where I live in France. And they were depending upon the rental to pay off most of the monthly payments they had to make to the people they bought it from. So along comes a very nice tenant with a wife and a son who wants to rent it. And he has a fairly established business in soft drinks and wine. Seems to be able to pay his bills well. But all of a sudden the business goes belly up. And he can't pay his rent, and he can't pay his rent, he can't pay his rent, and his wife deserts him, and the son leaves with his wife and doesn't come to visit. So here's poor old Mr. Balber, his name is, who's there left by himself in the apartment. So Claude says, Don, every once in a while, every 3-4 days, go over and ring on the doorbell and ask him if he's made any progress in trying to get some rent money. He hadn't been paying his rent for 7-8 months. And the owners of the apartment with the 2 little kids were just getting squeezed right up against the wall. They didn't know what to do. So it was really getting urgent. So I say, now, okay, Baba, I realize that this is going to chew up some Stephen Sand scars. So I make my little report to Baba and say, Baba, be with me. I know this has to ensnarl something in me. That's why I'm involved in it. So I'm going to do my darndest to keep my heart open and learn what it is I've got to learn here. I go over to Balber. He's in the opposite end of the same building, go up to the 10th floor. And for some reason or another, I don't know why, I can't explain any logic or reason for these things, but I decided that if I got angry, I was going to express my anger. That was a fundamental decision. And normally I know it's not supposed to be very spiritual to express your anger. So I couldn't square this with what I thought I knew about things, but I just had the instinct that maybe that was part of what I had to learn too. So over I go, up to the 10th floor, ring on the doorbell. Valberg comes out, and he's got on his best summer shorts, atrocious design. If there were ever a human being who could choose everything that I disliked, it was Balber. The way he cut his hair, the way he shaved, the sort of clothes that he wore, the way he talked to you, the words that he used, the whole kit and caboodle it was anti-Stevens taste. So, if ever, there are very few people who affect me that way, by the way. Usually I like people just sort of instinctively and intrinsically. It happens naturally. But I am used to the fact that every once in a while one crops up, and it is for a very good reason. So Albert comes to the door in these lovely summer shorts that look terrible, and said, "Oh, it's you." And I said, "Yes," and plods away, "but I wanted to check on your rent money." So Mr. Dalbert starts to say that, he starts to say that, and something else. And so that starts to make me mad, so I start shouting at him. The door over in the hall opens up, somebody looks to see if any sort of dangerous mayhem is going on. And I don't pay any attention to that. Mr. Valver is feeling indignant, you know. And we get into a shouting match, and finally I get so mad I pound on the door frame, you know, and the door opens again, and the person looks out to see if it's getting worse. And I don't know whether I'm doing the worst thing spiritually I could, but I made the decision. So when I get mad, I got mad, and I vented myself. So finally I saw it was not going to get anywhere at all, so I just said, "Valbert, let's shut up. This is hopeless. I'm going home, but you better do something about it." So he closes the door down, I go and off. So 3-4 days later, I make my report to Baba, and I include the fact in it that I lost my temper, and I really lost it bad. I don't think I ever pounded on the door frame before, but there we are. So, you know, I leave this with Baba with a complete, accurate accounting of what went on. I just say, "Baba, I don't know what's going on. I don't seem to have unwound very much. I think I wound it up tighter. I sure felt tense and tight." And so 3-4 days later, I said, "Oh my God, it's time to go to Valver again." So same routine, you know, up there, door opens and so on. This time I noticed that for some strange reason, his left foot is not on the marble floor. It's sort of up here, and it's sort of doing something like that. Well, I'm not a doctor, but I didn't like the looks of that. It sort of concerned me. But, you know, I put that aside. We go through our routine, and he tries to explain, and I get mad. I'm not sure if I beat on the door frame the second time, but, you know, I was in a real good pivy of a pet. And so, at any rate, I said, I noticed you've got a little problem with your foot. He said, "Oh, it's my just blood sugar problem, diabetes." He said, "With all the tension, it's acting up." And so I sort of put that in the back of my mind. 3-4 days later, same routine. The only thing is, this time, his foot seems to be shaking more. So instead of starting off with, "Where's the rent money?" I said, "Well, it's getting worse." I said, "What about it? What about your wife? What about your son? Are they going to help you with this?" He says, "Why doesn't my son ask me that?" And that sort of got something into my heart, you know, and I think I forgot about the rent money entirely. And I said, "You know, we've got to work out some sort of a solution to this." And so you do a little thinking, and I'll try to do some thinking. He came back 3-4 days again. He met me at the door, and he said, "Miss Stevens, I think we've got a means of doing this." He had worked out some sort of a settlement that he thought might give him just enough of a nest egg to get back home and maybe get into a social security hospital in Belgium or something like that. And he said, "If you bring your lawyer over, we'll do a set of papers so it can all be done properly and legally." He set the date for it. I came over with our lawyer, and I had a little, just as I was about to leave my apartment, I had one of these little "Don't worry, be happy" cards with Mayor Bob's picture on it, you know. And just sort of instinctively, I tucked that in my pocket and took it over. And when he opened the door, and I brought the lawyer, and we sat around the table and got all the papers signed, all in place. And at the last minute, I remembered this little card, and I said, "Mr. Dalbert, excuse me, but I know this doesn't mean anything to you, but this is a person who's near and dear to my heart. And I wish you would take this with you, because you'll certainly go into the hospital. Just have it somewhere. I'd just like to know that you have it with me." So he disappeared, and we rented out the apartment. About 2 weeks later, I get a long-distance call from Brussels, from the hospital. And Dalbert is there, and he said, "Well, Don, I want you to know they have blocked the condition of the diabetes, and it seems to be coming under control all right. And the Belgian government have decided to give me a half pension because of disability, so I'm all right financially. And said, oh, and by the way, I still have that little picture. I really love it. So I said to myself, well, by God, I suddenly realized that about 3 layers down, I had really come to an internal contact. As, in a sense, I loved this man. I knew he loved me, and it was just that simple. And somewhere or another, Baba had established the fundamental that there is this reality of a human being who has warmth and humanness. Sometimes you have to dive a little bit deeper, but if you can get rid of layer 1 and maybe even layer 2, there you are. And so I said to myself, my God, if I can come to accept a person as obnoxious as Val Burr, it must be possible to establish internal links with anybody. And it should be impossible, not just for Stevens, but anybody who takes Baba seriously. The reason I sit around and dwell on this is simply because I'm convinced of one thing, that Baba's God Speaks is the great mystic book of the New Age, and as part of our responsibility to take down some of the barriers first in ourselves and know what we had to do, and find out a little bit how to help another person do that so they can profit by this great treasure house. But I also know that in order really for ourselves to profit by it, I have an instinct we've got to do what Harry was thinking about. These things seem to be going into sort of a small mystic circle of people who somewhere or another exist together in great love and sympathy and understanding. Real companionship with real internal links. But that's a pretty big challenge. You've got to look awfully deep inside of yourself. You can't indulge in all the old things. Somewhere or another, you have to do exactly the same thing that Baba did with me with Val Burr, and that is just somewhere or another persist until you get to the layer where you find the human being, and there you establish your link. But then, that's the beginning of the job. Then you've got to keep it shining bright. We can't kid ourselves about these things. Just being diplomatic and keeping it under covers doesn't do the reality inside. An inner link is an inner link, by God. Yes, please.
Could you give a clear, concise explanation of what inner links consist of?
Well, I would certainly say for me, as we discussed when Harry was bringing out what he thought it meant in the group, for me, it means real companionship of the sort that Arish and the Mandali felt with Baba under the toughest sort of external conditions. This real sense of oneness inside and of real participation.
You mean that a person really cares about the other fellow,
Exactly.
cares about his brother.
You feel warm about him, instinctively.
And even when he's having problems and troubles, you don't go and keep out of it and keep everything cheery. You're with him, and even if it's just to put your hand on his shoulder, or just listen.
Or even say, why under the sun is his foot shaking? You just feel instinctively attracted to what you see as a problem, and you're sorry that that's happening to another human being. What's going on? What is it? How can one try to do something about it?
To be with that person, so that person isn't just all locked up in himself and going through it.
Not alone anymore.
In other words, just not alone.
Not alone, yeah.
That we're with one another, with our heart and soul.
I don't know what it's all with, but it's certainly being with them totally.
May I just...
You don't reserve a part of yourself. I forgot all of these crazy, obnoxious things about Val Burr. I couldn't focus on them anymore. So the part of me, the real me, was somewhere or another linked up with an inner link. And it meant so much to me because We had been going over this question of inner links, especially in the French and the British groups for a while at that point. So it was Baba's great object lesson to me, what the reality of an inner link is, and how it can come into a real reality with no forcing under the most difficult, negative circumstances to come into reality, and it happens by itself. You just let it happen, because it's got to happen.
Because you don't shut off from sharing the
I
good or the bad.
always opened up to Baba before I opened up after. And I think this is an essential part of the process. You open up to the one, to Baba himself. You share that with Baba, first of all, knowing that he's going to be right there in the middle of it, somewhere or another. Not making it, not unmaking it, but he's there holding your hand, and somewhere or another helping you with insight and opening up your own natural self.
May I
He's a
tell
door
you-
opener.
May I tell you something sort of
Yeah,
nice
please do.
about in my family?
Mhm.
Well, I have a son, Kenny. You know him. He comes to the meetings in Paris.
Mhm. I know Ken, yeah.
And then there's
He's got a
Richard.
terrific personality, by the way. Yeah.
I'll tell him because he always needs encouragement.
I see.
And then there's Richard, my other son. And then there's me. So we are, there's communication between Kenny and Richard and me about the meetings that Kenny goes to in Paris with you. And he tells
I'm
me
going to get
all.
Ken's real inside dope, what he thinks about it now.
He loves them, he loves them.
He loves them. Oh, that's
Loves
good,
them.
isn't it? And I think there's a bit crossed.
Oh no, he loves them.
Yeah.
And he said, be sure and go. When he knew about this, he said, you be sure and go. And he called to check to be sure that we were going. And so yesterday, or it was last night, for the Paris time, I called and left a message. I say, well, we're off to the seminar with Don. So it's a wonderful feeling that we have this connection.
Yeah, the inner links. So we've already established an inner link with Ken, then. That's great news. I think it's terrific. That's the way it ought to work. We've just got to take this business for serious, or we're not going to get anywhere with our real Baba's trust in us. But Baba's trust in us is obviously based on the fact that we establish this fundamental as the primary thing. Otherwise, we're going to do a lousy job. We really are. And the only way that we're going to mine out God's speech is to do it with people with whom we've got inner links so that we can share this warmth back and forth creatively. Yes, please.
Just something that came to my mind that I really wanted to amplify and see what you thought about when you spoke about Mr. Balber and his observing his leg. Something that always strikes me in hearing stories about Baba is how personal he was with individuals.
Oh,
and it was
absolutely.
always brought out in stories, and the Monolith will emphasize this, and other individuals as well, how he would always ask, how is your health? He would make that, perhaps that personal link, and I'm wondering, that seems to me to amplify what we're discussing here, perhaps.
Not just how is your health, how did you sleep last night? Did you have a good dinner? Did it digest well? Did you go to the toilet this morning? Was it a good one? Oh no? Well, let's hurry up and give them some orange then. Here we go. That was always the first order of the business. Always.
Well, that's interesting, 'cause it tied into, for me, in answering the question that my mother had, which is how do we establish those inner links? And for me, I'm seeing that perhaps it is just as simple as being trying to be what I would consider perhaps being as human as possible.
Or just being open, not arrive defensively. I was arriving offensively, of course, but I opened up to Baba, and he helped me open up and see something about Balber. There has to be a deliberate opening somewhere or another. But for heaven's sake, every time that you're going to be with other Baba people, and especially in a delicate, potentially combative situation where all sorts of things can fly around, do open up with Baba and say, Baba, help me. Tell me what's going to go on. And what your own feelings are. Be frank. Be honest with it. You got to say, golly, I don't know, that person over there who's going to be at that meeting, every time she opens her mouth, I want to shut her up. we've got these things. All right, open up with Baba. When you do that, somewhere or another, a bit of magic starts to establish and things become possible that aren't possible otherwise. But it has to be established, first of all, on the basis of real honesty. Honesty with Baba, and then into the situation.
I was going to say that actually the internal link is really a recognition of Mayor Baba actively functioning within you and the other person. You know, and when you...
Could I suggest, Catherine, maybe a tiny bit of different interpretation, that it establishes the reality of something that is there really. Oneness is a reality.
Yeah.
And Baba helps us enormously if we open up our hearts to Him to reestablish the conscious recognition of it, to bring it into a manifested state where it moves and it supports the present situation. Fred, you had
I
something.
was just going to comment that, do you have group meetings that concentrate on this interconnections?
Well, we concentrated
I mean, you said that 4 or 5 people that meet on a regular basis.
Well, let me correct the statistics a little bit. They have found that they can develop realistically interlinks in a group of somewhere between, say, 4 to a maximum of 12 people. From there on, it gets more dicey. I guess there's so many differences that, just to be simple and honest and realistic, you can apparently digest, I would just guess, so much difference before you start getting some type of indigestion, which seemed to impair the inner links. And also, a terribly important thing that I've noticed in the group is that they function well when there is time for each person to be able to express his viewpoint and share it with the others. In other words, this is the road that an interlink needs. You need to express things and share it. You can't just sit and do nothing at all about it. So they've got to have the time and the opportunity to share. So 8 to 12, I mean 4 to 12. When it's less than 4, for some reason or another, there isn't enough difference of viewpoint to make it really interesting and exciting. And maybe not enough pooling of intuitions, is it? I don't know. But 4 is pretty slim. And 12 gets to be about a maximum of digestibility and availability of time.
So do you meet weekly?
Well, it's at least once every 2 weeks. If we're not all there together, then the hardcore members meet in between. But there has to be, a regularity of sharing. We're built that way, We're still stuck in time and space, and so we need to do these things on a fairly regular basis and keep the thing warm. Yes, way back, Tim.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems to me whenever Baba talks about links, or you talk about links in relation to Meher Baba, I always think about how he emphasized remembrance of him. And he said, remember me wholeheartedly, keep me with you, love me. He always emphasized that internal, for us to make the effort to reach out to him. He said he's done his part in what you read, but there's also responsibility that he endows us with on a moment-to-moment type of basis. Am I keeping Baba with me? Am I remembering him consciously? Am I making an effort to keep him with me? It seems to me that was an important part of what Baba said about links.
Could you bear Stephen's interpretation of why that's so important? Not just because Mayor Baba is important, but psychologically, I think it makes tremendous sense also. That is, Baba points out, and I certainly know that it is true, that when we get back to this old priority that is really what we've got to get on with as human beings, unwinding, getting rid of the samskaras, it is very obvious that when my personal ego is not in the center of things, in an action, then the counter samskara that rolls up at the other end of it is a lot less tight and a lot less energized. In other words, the absence of my ego is an important factor. And above all, if I can be thinking about perfection, then it is doubly and triply and quadruply effective. Okay? makes sense psychologically. It's the absence of the ego. And so, gee whiz, nothing could help more to make my ego absent than to think of somebody that I love tremendously and trust totally, such as Mayor Bob.
Okay, you were saying that groups of more than 12, say, it gets a little bit too many differences and too much indigestibility.
For certain types of things,
Right.
not all types of things.
Well, when you have a group of about 30 or 40 people and there's massive indigestibility, Tim came up...
Today is an exception.
Oh, absolutely. Today is very exceptional. Tim came up with, and what you just said about getting yourself out of the way, getting the ego out of the way, and asking Barbara to help you, they're all words that have been bandied about and have been tried, and it's not succeeding so well. There's still a lot of indigestibility. What else would you recommend?
Patience.
Patience and Pepto-Bismol.
Keep pushing.
Keep pushing.
Remember what Baba said about selfless service, and I think that's one of the most beautiful expressions. He said, now, selfless service is one of the best ways to get rid of samskaras, to get rid of the ego. And he said, of course, when you start out on selfless service, you're all self-conscious and you're aware of the fact you're thinking more about the impression you're going to make on the people whom you are being selfless and servicing. And so you get sort of disgusted with yourself. And it's a very discouraging process. So Bob is realistic. He paints out this picture that we know so well every time we try to do a kindness for somebody, that we don't know too terribly well, so it doesn't come too spontaneously. So, and he said, nevertheless, persevere. And he said, as you persevere, you will gradually find that these problems fall by the wayside, and finally, the welfare of that person becomes truly the focus of your attention. Because why? Because that's the way you're built, way down deep inside of yourself. That's where the soul function starts to shine out, and eventually you pierce to it. But you got to do a little persevering. Doesn't that make sense? I think it's terrific. It is such a realistic and such a tremendously helpful way of going about it. He doesn't say, well, you're a beautiful being anyway, just get in there and pitch. No, he says, it's a mess when you start. And then he says, but so-and-so, and you find that but so-and-so is perfectly true. It's great, yes.
One thing Bob has said, one of the best ways to dissolve samskaras is solitude. But then he also says that certain, some yogis will go into the forest and meditate for many, many years, and then when they're done, the samskaras were just sort of dormant, and then they get full force and they take action again. So I was kind of wondering if there's a difference between that and solitude, and if solitude actually does dissolve samskaras, or when you come out of solitude, are you just gaining full force again?
I think Bob has suggested solitude is very helpful to re-equilibrate and regain poise. It puts you in a situation where you can go back and tackle the necessary more realistically. But he certainly says that to go up and sit in a cave does very little to your samskaras.
Because
but it can rescue and repose you, but for how long?
Well, I like to do solitude, not just because I think I'm going to dissolve samskaras. It's just something that I've kind of been put into lately. I just feel more like being in solitude. And so I always wonder, okay, am I just letting my samskaras sit there dormantly, and then sometime later, they're just going to explode and try to gain full force?
Let's trade a couple of punches on that.
Yeah.
It's perfectly possible that a liberal component, part of the push within you, the instinct towards some solitude, is simply because you need it in order to calm the nerves to get yourself back in a position to do a better job in daily life challenges. It can also be perfectly possible that a certain plus or minus component of all of that is because you have a dread of the sort of problems that come up when you're with other people. They pose all sorts of unpredictable things that makes you nervous and jittery and so on. And you're not a human being if your desire for solitude is not some admixture of those two.
Right.
So you can't say, oh God, why do I be this? I probably ought not to try to be solitude at all. But what's necessary, you get back to this old business that Bob brings up so frequently, of honesty. So you try to be honest with yourself. And when you're in solitude, ask yourself, am I trying to escape a lot of problems? And then deal realistically. When you come out of solitude, say, I've got to get on to that. So don't try to prolong the solitude and postpone the evil moment of getting on with problematical relations. We just simply have to judge these things by being honest with ourselves. Yes, way back.
Excuse me. Do our, in reference to our inner links, does our natural
leanings?
No, natural instincts.
Yeah.
Do our natural instincts have priority over our desires in reference to that, or am I mistaken there?
You know, when you say natural instincts, that can be a loaded double-barrel shotgun, because a lot of natural instincts can just come really without our realizing it straight from the samskaras. Because when we say natural, all we know is that it just seems to pop up to the surface without our having anything to do with it. But on the other hand, a natural instinct, a truly natural instinct, goes way back to the soul pattern and its knowledge. So a truly, truly, truly natural instinct comes from the soul pattern. The only trouble is we don't know when it is truly natural and when it is non-natural, frankly.
I'm having a hard time with these two statements about internal link. And if it was just left with
Two statements about
to me, there's two statements here. One, there's an internal connection with Baba.
Yeah.
That's, and I'm trying to visualize it. I can vision sort of as a vertical thing, or somehow I'm linked inside. Then there's the sense that this will enable all persons to realize truth by being bound to each other by him. If we left out each other, it wouldn't be a problem. But somehow I now have...
Not a problem.
No, it is a problem.
It is.
No, it's a huge problem. And that's
now we're on the same wavelength.
And the problem is I don't even understand it because the connection is with Barbara. But now, here I'm going to get connected with Linda and Ed. How is that going? I'm going to get connected with Bob.
Let's be realistic then. Right there.
Through each other, we kind of maintain them.
Oh, excuse me. Let's be realistic about it. If you say, okay, the second one, it's perfectly straightforward. Corresponds to my experience, the desire to have inner links with Baba. But all of a sudden, Baba says, now you've got to have inner links in a chain. And fine, it's not just with Baba. That stays simply, he's going to go off. You know, after all, it doesn't take much imagination to know that, especially with new people, it's pretty hard to establish an inner link with somebody you've never known, never been around. All you know is his writings and his reputation. So inner links are going to have a concrete right here and now, I'm in the middle of it and what's going on connotation. It's going to be with another physical form somewhere. That's the first challenge in establishing inner links when the master is not there in the physical form. You may abstractly love him and think his words are absolutely marvelous and have that. But the big challenge, the day-to-day challenge, because inner links, believe you me, are based and they're brought into reality in tough situations such as we were talking about. Adele was saying there are a lot of racial minorities around and there is an awful lot of difference in culture. So inner links are brought into and forged into reality and in strength in some pretty tough oppositional situations. So it's much more likely that you go through a realistic formation of inner links with Linda rather than an an abstract to somebody that you've never been around, who's never posed challenges to you.
Well, how?
I want to be absolutely crystal clear, as far as I'm concerned, that an inner link is not just established on the theory of goodwill, or nice thoughts and nice principles. The reality comes through some pretty tough experiences. You've got to wade through them, and you've got to hold on sometimes and really fight.
Yeah, I can grasp having an internal link with Bob. If Bob is the inner being, I can make links by thinking of him before, talking to him, making those links, and realize truth by that, maybe, at least hopefully I would. But I really don't get it, and it seems so contrary almost, that one sentence, that by
Believe me,
being
it's
bound
not
to others.
contrary.
Well, no, I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying.
Papa doesn't
to me-
say these things for theoretical
Yeah,
reasons.
I'm just saying how
It appears.
how it appears to me. For instance, what's the statement? I'm sure you know this of love. Don't love me in everybody. Love me in everybody else. It's like the link is with the avatar, with God as the inner being, and then.
That isn't what he says there, though, is it? He doesn't.
Yeah, no, that's why.
Half of the challenge is outside of that.
Yeah, no,
In fact, he implies that it is now being largely superseded. And the other type of inner links is going to be the one which is terribly important. One's got to be careful about, do some real work.
This is going to mess up my
I'll
whole
ask
life
you-
here, Don. I'm going to have to go do something.
I want to suggest something not just to you, but to absolutely everybody, and that is, almost everybody is employed somewhere or another, and almost everybody has somebody in the organization where you're employed who is a son of a bitch. Now, why not, let's say, choose, you say to yourself, I'm going to make a test tube experiment out of this particular person and my relation with him. What will happen if I tried to establish an inner link to that person? How would I go about it? First of all, you've got to be convinced that, at least in theory, that it makes a little bit of sense to try to make an inner link with a tough person that you really think is obnoxious. I did that just shortly after I became a Sufi, and it was one of the greatest eye-openers I ever had in my life, to see the rapidity with which naturally something established itself. And I said to myself, go ahead and try the damn thing and have good faith. And I was astonished when it worked. Okay, so pick out a guinea pig situation and try it out. And all right, then try out another situation. Maybe it's a relative in your family, who's a ne'er-do-well or something about him, just absolutely kills you every time you think about it. And you say, okay, here's a toughie. You go ahead and make a deliberate Baba experiment with that person. And open your heart to Baba and see what happens. All I'm saying is try it. And I am sure you will find that exactly the same thing will happen that Baba says happens when you try selfless service. It's a mess to start with. But by golly, with a bit of persistence, something that is true inside of yourself establishes itself, and it becomes natural and it's real. Yes?
Well, what you said there is, that's the obvious place. But to me, that means that you already have links already there.
Ain't it great? That's marvelous. So it should be a shorter trajectory then.
Is that, do you not agree that you already have all these inner links with people who you're interacting with anyhow, or you're part of them interacting with, and you're working through things together through tradition. And it's the easiest way to start that. Take the time to shut up and listen to that.
Yeah, there you go.
And because I think that's often what's missing. You just assume that you
It helps an awful lot.
just stop and listen. Draw them out.
It's a big deal. But don't forget, you've got the responsibility to offer yourself. So maybe that's 50%, or it might even be 80% at a certain time. But you've got your responsibility back on a two-way street. But you say, don't you have the inner links already there? Have you got your shotgun loaded because you're going to shoot me for this one?
Then you go get it
All
closed.
right. Isn't it a fact that a part of truth is unity? Isn't that a quality of reality that the Bible says is a property of reality, unity, indivisible unity? All right, so it has to be there already, doesn't it? We just got to dust it off by some way.
Well, it has to be there, but you certainly do not, in this lifetime, have links with every person, everybody.
I'm not sure. I'm absolutely dumbfounded what happens when you try out, as if they're for real, some of the things that Bob has said we're going to have to do. You know? And so rather rapidly, things that you would have thought were absolutely impossible in the present lifetime, that you think would take 3 or 4 or 5 lifetimes, all of a sudden, my God, is there, and how did they get there? Well, you finally conclude the avatar knew what he was talking about, and you press the right button. So you got into that at that point. Take it for real and try it out. But then don't kid yourself as to what the results are, because every once in a while, you take off a whole great big mass of real crap on the outside, and you get to something that's exciting. But then it can happen, and certainly it happens with me very frequently. I thought, well, I've gotten through that one, it's solved. And 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years later, I say, oh gosh, I just peeled one layer of the onion off, and now I'm to another one that's pretty messed up. So be prepared for that also, as part of reality. Yes, Lois?
Yeah, I think I'm probably just concurring with what a few other people said, because so much has been said since I've had my hand up, but I was just thinking...
Sorry, Lois.
No, this is great. No, this is
It's Steve's fault, he didn't give me a kick
All
up.
my fault.
No, but not just you, but others who were speaking. I was just going to say, in response to Harold's statement, is that, you know, if you and I are not we but one, then the internal link we're establishing really has to include other people, because other
It's even
people
got to include diametrically opposite.
Right, exactly.
Has
And the other thing that I think that Dinah stopped short of saying is what a giant test tube the LA group is. And so that there are numerous opportunities, and I think I think that we're fortunate that we have these opportunities to work on the internal links. And the thing that I was thinking as you were talking about, making a test case of someone, this and that, isn't that just sort of the difference between you were saying, Ed, that we automatically, of course the link's already there, and so what you're saying, isn't that just sort of the difference between being conscious of the link versus unconscious of it, when you make the decision to make an experiment and see how things change between you and that person, because the link is really there?
It is there, but the only thing I would say, Lois, is that I think there's a bit of an implication is that once you get into the right track, then it's all easy, clean sailing, easy going. And I don't think it's perhaps quite that easy. You've got to work at it. And again, I get back to this word that Bob had used in key fashion and repeated it to me. Don, you have to tell people that they must work with my words. Remember that. And the word work is something that implies time, calories, patience. It just doesn't happen automatically. And that's the sort of thing that we've got to be prepared to invest. We have a little bit too much the idea, God, we're linked up with the avatar, and the avatar is the source of all truth and all power, and he can do anything, and sort of unconsciously we assume that, if we just sort of got it right somewhere in our heart, then the magic wand arrives and it's all done, and that's it.
It's like the how many Bob Lovers says it takes a screw in the light bulb business, right?
Okay.
Only 9, the board of directors.
No, none. They wait for Bob to do,
Exactly. I think we better add this to the story. Lois has really hit it.
But anyway, I've done that when we're talking about making that decision to make the effort to, and it makes a tremendous difference, but I've also experienced what you talked about, where it was only one layer being peeled off, and there's a lot more to
A
go.
lot more to go, to be realistic. Mahu, what you point out, that patience is required is a reflection on a reality, and that is that these habit patterns have been inbuilt over centuries and centuries, and lifetimes and reincarnations. And, you know, they have a lot of layers of crust involved in them. And so all of those layers don't, even with the very best of intentions, just wear away quickly. I can think of so many times in my own life after I became a Sufi and after I came under Baba's direct thumb. And I thought, well, it ought to happen fairly fast now. But I didn't concentrate too much on that because being around Baba and knowing he was there was so wonderful that it was a wonderful thing to know. But still, every once in a while, I'd sort of take stock of what was going on in the inner man. And I would see this samskara that I knew exactly how it was when I was 15 years old, let's say. And here I was getting to be 55 or 65, and the same, it just looked like it was in its exact original state. And I would think, oh boy, this is going to take a long time. But you know what would have happened in two terribly important instances of deep samskaric patterns that I knew were on the chopping block for this lifetime and were important. You know, finally I was getting just so discouraged with seeing absolutely no progress at all. And all of a sudden, for no reason, it disappeared from one day to the next. And it never came back. And then when, let's say maybe 10 years later, a second one went through exactly the same process of just, suddenly it was no longer there. And the day before, it had been just as obnoxious and snotty as it had ever been. And I would have sworn it would take at least 50 more lifetimes even to make a dent in it. But I think, you know, somewhere or another, this is the way that our Sen, I don't think one becomes aware of a weakening process in the samskaras until it's ready to give up the ghost and disappear into neutrality. So take heart on this. This is important. Take courage. Yes.
In the early days of my coming to Meher Baba, it was 1947, 48,
A little bit
49.
louder, please.
In the early days of my first coming to Meher Baba in 1947, 48, 49, 50, and up until Malcolm Schloss, did you know him?
Oh, yes, very well.
Well, he was my mentor. He was my link to Baba. And
Lovely.
He had a group in a little simple one-bedroom a single apartment in the Hollywood Hills, and he had a kind of a pattern, which was a Saturday night he would read it would be poetry, and people would come and share their poetry, and he would also read his great, wonderful poetry. Then the next week it would be the game of creative living. And then the next week he would read from the discourses or Baba, the journal, early Meher Baba journals, and things like that. And then the next week again was the game of creative living. And it was really quite a wonderful thing, because unfortunately the notes that I had got destroyed, so I can't show any. But I only can tell one example that is clear in my mind of what he would deal with. He'd take a word like anger, a characteristic like anger, then he'd give it to sort of someone in the group who would go and research that word in the dictionary and the thesaurus, then come back the next week or the next time that Game of Creative Living came up. But in the meantime, each of us were to go and in our daily life observe how we handled anger when it came up in us and when we were dealing with it in other people. And
So
then
you became aware of it that way.
right. And he gave one wonderful thing. He said, when you are angry, when you become aware, that conscious that you are angry, you have already been angry in the subconscious. But we can't do anything about our subconscious.
Yeah.
So When the moment you become aware or conscious that you are angry, you have an opportunity to what he called apply the moment of decision, when you can just, to the best of your ability, stop it right there. Just don't go on expressing it. So then in the second week, this lady would tell all the different synonyms of anger. And one of the things that stands out in my mind is that hurt, oh, I'm hurt. No, I'm not angry. I'm not angry. I'm just hurt. But what she brought out was hurt was one of the synonyms of anger. And I think about this all through my whole rest of my life because it's very significant. And then he said, when you are conscious of it, you can apply the moment, he called it the moment of decision, and you can decide to stop it. So then we'd go for another 2 weeks and observe how well we did with nipping it in the bud or not getting pulled into the anger of somebody else who's reacting to anger. Anyway, it was a very wonderful...
Well, Malcolm Schloss had that wonderful ability to bring out things and to draw out people. He was really one of Baba's close masters. Adele wanted to add something.
Would you say that was
You know,
he was
in
working
God
on
Speaks,
inner
just
links?
as we said,
Sorry.
just as in God Speaks, we above us, I haven't really studied each word to see if he never used the word love. He never used the word love.
Oh, I'm sure it's there, but it's rarely used.
Rarely used.
Very rarely used.
By the same token, he never, or rarely, I haven't studied each word. Grace, the word grace. Now, the whole idea of grace is something that I get very exhilarated with the word grace.
I think we should.
Because that's something that gives me a very big high.
Yeah.
Because in two senses. That is, grace, as I see it, I'd love to hear how you express grace. You just got through saying how you had these struggles with your ego trying to experience the oneness aspect of Baba. And then suddenly, inadvertently, somehow, unexpectedly, it happened.
Or the problem disappeared.
Yeah.
The samskara disappeared.
This is one kind of grace. This is the grace that thrills me very much. Where I just don't deserve it. It's undeserved grace. The kind that none of us deserve even.
But Baba says you have to work for it.
All this time. And then the kind that you work for, which you still don't deserve, but you're going to get it anyway.
Why do you say you don't deserve it?
No, you don't deserve it. Because we're short of the pure state. Until you're absolutely free of all is obstruction to the pure state, you don't deserve it. I mean, literally speaking. But, all right, the grace that you really don't deserve is one where it just happens. But then there's the one that Baba tells us, that beautiful discourse on how to win my grace. And there is a little bit of a question in my mind. I'd like to hear what you have to say, Phil. Because you are a catalyst, and you do what you said Malcolm does. You elicit a lot of questions from people. There is this other aspect where you are, where you get, as Baba once, Adi told the story, that they were discussing free will and predetermination, and then Baba came in and said, "What are you guys discussing?" And he said, "I could, in a flash, make this scoundrel outside there, God realized." There's that kind of undeserved grace. And then there's the kind where Baba, in that beautiful discourse, said, "How do you win my grace?"
Yeah.
Now, I'd like to have you distinguish between the subtlety of those two aspects of grace.
Well, I can certainly very quickly, simply give my one example of observing Baba's grace in my own case. actually is something that I recounted in the introduction to God Speaks, in the first introduction. Just very simply that without my realizing it in any way that I was being worked upon, Baba removed my habit of worry. It never came back for all the rest of my life.
But you worked on it.
I didn't work on it. That's the amazing thing.
Oh, you did?
I loved my worry. I not only wasn't trying to get rid of it, I was, thinking I was doing my job. So at any rate, but then also Baba points out that I think in that wonderful discourse on love, that true love comes by a master's grace. But then he goes to the other sort, and he says, but to have my grace, you must earn it. And in order to earn it, you must inbuild certain spiritual principles.
Supreme tolerance.
He gives 3 or 4 of them. He says, but this is almost impossible. So start with something that is practical and at least within your reach, and that is to control worry. He said it chews up more psychic energy than any other thing. So start with something that is within your grasp and which is spiritually terribly important. So that's the other one. But I wanted to go back to one of your comments and the manner in which you brought up the word love. I wanted to share quickly with you. A number of you have heard it, but I think it's so terribly important. When I was getting close to the end of the editing of the discourses, I was impressed by the number of discourses that Baba had given to meditation. When was the last time I told this story here? 6 months ago?
We don't remember.
No,
we don't remember.
I don't think we told it here.
Well, thank God, because this is an earth shaker to me. So I said to Baba, I'm getting fairly well along, Baba, but I really am puzzled because now I'm through the section that you did on meditation, and I've counted the number of discourses you devote to this in comparison to others, more on meditation than any other one thing. And why is it, Baba, I've been around you all of this time, you've never given me one single meditation? So important in the discourses, why not me? And, as Baba always did, I thought I was making sort of a wisecrack to him, but he took me very seriously. He said, Don, it's a very good question that you raise, and that is, I have not given you a meditation because during the period of the avatar's manifestation, and for some time afterwards, the path, the spiritual path of love to God realization is fully open to all of humanity. And during that time, it is a waste of time to meditate. So this is the reason I did not give you a meditation. But he said, however, that full open access to the path of love gradually narrows. And so, whereas it had been available to the great mass of humanity, it becomes relatively, increasingly inaccessible, except, let's say, to certain terribly special heroes of God or whatever not. And he said, so, at that time, then the best of the secondary routes to God is meditation. And because I must provide in the discourses my other writings for all of my lovers for the next 700 years, I must give in great detail discourses on meditation. So, first of all, the terribly important thing was that the high road of all roads to God realization is love. And just let me say, it didn't take me long to realize that Baba was not talking about just waiting around until the great flame of your life appears and then get with it, not at all. But I realized that the challenge of love is every second of your waking hours, probably in your sleep too, in all sorts of situations. When Baba's talking about the path of love, by golly, that's not reserved for 1 or 2 special relations in your life. It is a constant challenge. Incidentally, certainly in companionship, it's one of the chief challenges there. So, but the second thing, and it took me several years before all of a sudden the penny dropped, this said he had already manifested. Well,
He's
Steve
already
looks at me
manifested.
absolutely thunderstruck. He says, Stevens, I just don't know what to think. I'm shocked you say such a thing because all of the Mandalay say that Baba hasn't manifested yet. That's exactly what Baba said to me. And so I've said that ever since, 1964, that Baba's already manifested. So, which doesn't make me popular with a lot of people, but can I read it any other way? If Baba stares me straight in the face and say the reason I have not given you a meditation is because it's not necessary, because the path of love is fully open to you, because it is fully open when I manifest. So there we are. I saved this little bombshell until fairly late. I'd like to give a very simple phrase that's come down from our Christian church, I'm sure. God is love. Well, I don't know how far that gets us along the track, but it's a lovely statement. Really beautiful. But I think, in the long run, that somewhere or another, love has to be an innate property of oneness. That is our key to really getting on towards that reality of oneness, to find again oneness. To me, that's the hard core of it. Because every time I think I've made a tiny bit of progress on the path of love in relation to another being, it always involves finding things that I really feel at one with that individual. Maybe it's the spectrum of that person's nature, or perhaps it is concentrated on one or two or three things. But it's always unification and finding oneness. Yes?
Yesterday there was a discussion about the relationship between sanskara and karma, or what is the difference between two.
Yeah.
Would you please elaborate on that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that I'm any authority on that. It just seems to me that everything that I've ever read from Baba brings the two things into very, very close relationship, saying that they are very close together. And I myself, at one point, fairly recently, simply jotted down something that ran through my mind. Maybe it means something. And that was, I said to myself, that in an experience, in a situation, when something happens, there are two things that are, as it were, impressed or recorded. One is an energy knot, which we call the samskara. But I also said to myself that there is also apparently within God something like an accounting record, which is registered. So we have got to get rid of the psychic energy knot in certain situations. And it is also true that the accounting record must finally be balanced to zero, because creation itself is zero. So everything in the individual dropped soul that comes into existence, into so-called reality and creation, must finally be balanced out and eliminated and brought back to zero. So the accounting record, you might say, impressed upon God's notebook, related to me, Don Stevens, that accounting entry has to be balanced out to a zero, which I think is good accounting procedure. But I think is also typical of what has to happen in creation. So to me, the two things come from the same source. They are, at least in my mind, first cousins, and maybe even closer than that. Tim?
Yeah, I don't mean to change the subject, but getting back to...
How about free will? Let's be sure we don't go in 40 directions before we take one crack at free will. Go ahead.
Yeah, real quick, I was just getting back to the subject about conflict and links between individuals.
Sure.
And I was remembering a quote by Baba that I can't remember the entire quote, but the gist of it is, to love me is to love those whom you cannot love. Start learning to love me by loving those whom you cannot love.
It's a beautiful, challenging statement, and that was in my mind with Balfour, frankly. But try it. This is a wonderful one to try to work out.
Going along the same line as what he was talking about, I was thinking about earlier, that one of the things that we have that's kind of Baba's gift to us is we have both, through Bob's words, the ability to observe how to make the interlinks ourselves, and we also have the ability to, if we are careful and stand back from it, to observe maybe what the reason why the other person can't link with us, what we're maybe putting out there. And one of the things that Bob has done for me through the years is, I think one of the blocks that I feel is the human block is the concept of, is all our own personal concepts of perfection. And in a book like God Speaks, Bob just assembles any possible concept that you could have of what you think the universe is, where you think you are, who you think you should be or shouldn't be, and just destroys all that. And once that's gone, you're kind of in a position where you can just, in a sense, use Bob as an example. I mean, Bob met people where they stood. I mean, he met a villager where he stood. He would hold up male babies, turn to the mother and ask the mother, what sex is it? And he's looking straight at the baby. You know, I mean, he would play the fool or the most intelligent person in the world. And I think that what that shows us is that we have this ability within ourselves. We're willing to give up a little bit to allow ourselves to unify with something and experience something bigger than ourselves.
We've got to take our own walls down before we can do that effectively. So that's a job we've got to do on ourselves. It's the first inhibition. Harry.
Continue with the subject of inner links. What I'm hearing from you, what I'm picking up is there's two types of conditions of the inner link. I'm hearing like a general inner link, where we're just sort of linked with each other, we're linked with
Which
the people.
Baba calls a chain. Keep that in your mind.
Okay, a chain.
Because it's important.
Okay, where anybody we come in contact with, you know, we're linked up and like we're all linked together. But I'm hearing a distinction, and that is what you're doing in Europe, without what I call like the Pacific interlink, where you form a group, you know, and you consciously work together as a group. That to me seems fundamentally different than just a general internal link. The general internal link was sort of like just kind of going along and, okay, I'm going to try to get along with this person, get along with that person. But the specific link, like your groups, that's something different. That's something you formulate. You create a group and you work with it. And that's maybe something we need to think about, but that's another step. That's a further development of the inner link.
We know each other pretty well enough and have just one of those instinctive sympathies for each other's viewpoint. So I would just have to say to you that I think the concept of a general inner link is a great idea which doesn't exist in creation. And we have the challenge to form specific inner links into a chain. And maybe from that something generalizes, but I don't think it can conceivably come into existence until we form that link, and that link, and that link, and that link. And then maybe something generalized based on that can spring into existence. I just have to be honest. I think we take one more, and then I want to just quickly say one thing on free will. Nancy, you had your hand up.
Yes, well, this is a little off the subject, but it's something I was just reading about in the supplement, about, it's talking about a person on a mental plane, actually, that would visualize themselves in another place and they could automatically be there. But I'm thinking in this age that we're living in now, the 90s, where visualization and New Age is such a part of living and doing better and one thing and another, positive thinking, I'm wondering if that was ever discussed with you, with Baba, from Baba, how that would apply. Because I've even had Baba too say to me, visualize myself in the tomb, to imagine myself there. And I know I do use this, and I think all of us do in different ways. And I'm just wondering if that has any place in all of this. And my other question is something Adele asked you, because it troubles me when Adele talks about things like grace, and she always says, but I don't deserve anything, I don't deserve anything. It seems that we're all little drop cells of God, we do deserve something, don't we?
No, actually, I would just have to reply, I think we get a great deal. we don't just deserve it, but, you know, sometimes I think we're pretty
Well, no,
rotten
it's the very
spoiled.
nature of the Christ, of the avatar, to give you, out of compassionate, sacrificial love, part of what is such an unbelievable thing as his sharing his love. And that's why he came into creation, to give himself in the act of love. I mean, that is hard to feel that you deserve it much of the time.
Well, that's one of the things he came into creation, certainly, but I would have to suggest that Baba enumerates a number of reasons that the avatar comes into creation. He has a pretty broad job description. But can I just quickly risk a tiny venture into free will?
Yes.
And this is at the end so that you see I can escape quickly by the escape hatch. So I think I would suggest that one think a little bit about the psychic energy knotted up in samskaras. And Baba points out that for many reincarnations, the actions of the individual are almost completely mechanically produced by the samskaras that are relevant to the situation in hand. In other words, there ain't any free will in that period at all. But then by implication, what is suggested is that when you start to unknot samskaras, and the energy is not, let's say, just controlled by the form, the pattern in which the samskara had been formed, that energy is available. It's always seemed to me that at that point, the true component, the basic component of free will comes into being, and that is disposable, free psychic energy. But then I would immediately suggest that we've got to take a leaf from Baba's notebook again, that when that happens, normally it is intended to go into the requirements, the energy requirements for movement along the spiritual path. Baba says that is tremendously demanding of psychic energy. This is not Don Stevens imagining this point. Baba says this is one of the great reasons not to worry, because you need to start storing that psychic energy to make real progress on the spiritual path. Just as simple as that. So, in a sense, you have disposable psychic energy when you start to get somewhere with these samskaric knots, but it ought to be used in getting somewhere on the spiritual path. I think that's all straight from Baba. Then I would also suggest that I believe that we have to take Baba very seriously when he implies that we have quite a great deal of flexibility how we go along the path to perfect that charge, that particular responsibility of divine individualized consciousness. So I think that we have all sorts of free decision at that particular point, free will that comes into the picture. But the one place we do not have any free will is about the design, the pattern of my responsibility of the iota of infinite individualized consciousness, which was mapped out in the beginning when the whim started to surge, as we discussed this morning. Very charming and very energetic gal in the London group, when this came up in the seminar for God's Feast. She said, I just suddenly had a picture. It was just as at the surging of the whim. Just stopped right there. And there is a tremendous picture of infinite God and all of God's infinitude. And suddenly, it breaks into a jigsaw puzzle. And the jigsaw puzzle is an infinitude of pieces of individual dropped souls, each different from the other. But they all make up the picture of God's infinite individualized consciousness. And everybody just sort of thought, God, that is a really an inspired insight, because it makes so much sense. So I leave that particular one with you. You've got the particular part of the jigsaw puzzle. How you go about it, whether you do it fast or whether you do it stubbornly or so on, you can make the decision. That's where your free will comes in. But you can't get lost. And you have got to fulfill it finally. It's got to come back to perfection. So, shall we be silent with Baba for a moment? Dearly beloved Bob, always in your loving being. Amen. Jai Baba.